Longer. I think it's a little quiz to start things off.
We have a quiz to start off
Yeah.
with, yeah.
Okay, I'll hand you over to Brian. Brian White.
Question 1 has already been answered. Question 2 is the one that causes most people the problem. And it's the reason why it's connected to one of the houses on this road. And when it was first devised in 1891, Percy French was the person who was the referee of the game. Still not got it? The answer is cycle polo. Polo on a bicycle. The house with the link with the crown jewels is this house, and as we go through the talk, you will see as you step into this house, you'll step across the coat of arms of the person who was involved in the crown jewels, and a family relation as well. The last person to see the crown jewels was the person's cousin who lived in this house here. And Arthur Conan Doyle, his uncle Henry Edward Doyle, lived in Rahan House on the Killarney Road, and he was the director of the National Gallery. And there is saying that Arthur Conan Doyle visited Bray, but the only reference we have to him of Bray is in a book that is called The Desert, something just escaped the memory for the moment. It'll come to me from the talk. We have it on the slide anyway, so I can take. So that's Arthur Conan Doyle's connection to the town. So what I had was 3 little extra prizes, so you can give them out to somebody during the night.
Okay, well, I'll do it at the end.
Who's the boy?
Right, we're covering, this is the map of Bray, and we're looking at from the town hall in Bray up the Killarney Road as far as the Boghall Road junction on the R767. The old road to Wicklow, or the coastal route, went on the east side of the town hall. This was just a link road to Kilmechanic and the new petrol station that was built in 1926 for Tom Fitzpatrick at the southern end of the Killarney Road. As you come off the slip road at the Bray South, heading across the Southern Cross Road to Greystones, you would come across the 1926 petrol station. It's now the Topaz petrol station on the Killarney Road. So that's where the Killarney Road goes from, but we didn't cover the whole of the Killarney Road. This is Baker's map of 1762 of the Killarney Road. And we can see it's mainly made up of agricultural holdings by a couple of people, Robert Adair, Joseph Bailey, Mr. Scott, Mr. Proctor, and there is one other fella, where has he gone? Scott Proctor. So basically 5 people held the land. One interesting piece of ground here is called Cullodow Close. Culla meaning a wood, doe is for an area where 2 yew trees, and a close is a narrow strip of land. Just beyond what's Ferry Hill and the housing estate of Ferry Hill. The areas here we can see belong to the Edwards of Old Court, so we can see they had interest in the pieces of land marked Old Court, although Old Court is to the east side of the Killarney Road. A couple of houses dotted along the road, and we can see how the road changed over the years as well. And also we'll throw in a bit of genealogy as well as we go along. Because for the whole of the talk, we did 140 family trees of the people who were involved on the Killarney Road. Projected a bit. When we look at the Griffiths valuation map of the of Bray and the Killarney Road, here we can see the Killarney Road. We can see that Thomas James and William Peter Jackson had rented the land that we saw of Cullodow earlier on. 1970s, when the big houses started to sell off in Bray and the sudden housing boom started, we lost 90% of our agricultural holdings in the town. So all these little fields that were there are now fields of housing. So we have names like Patchwork, Ardmore, Fairy Hill, Kilbride, Old Court, and you can see these names are the people recognised today on the Killarney Road. In 1860, Mr. Rennie Powell, who came out and wrote his book about the railways, he described the Killarney Road as a road suitable for gentlemen's houses. And this is what he was referring to. A country lane leading from the town hall in Bray up to Kilmechanic. I reckon this fellow did his driving lessons in America, because he's on the right hand side of the road instead of the left. And if you ever noticed that about pictures in Ireland, where the fella's over the far side of the road, the wrong side of the road.
Yeah.
This is Glencourt behind it, and Christchurch was built in 1862. The road today looks like that, with the cycle lane put in 2004. And there's a plaque on the wall here to tell you that the cycle lane was put in 2004 and opened by Anne Ferris of the County Council. We had the Tour de France came past Bray and up the Killarney Road in 1998 to mark the 1798 Rising. And here we can see they went down to Rathdrum and visited the sites of the 1798 Rising in County Wicklow. And here we can see the tour of the starting in Ireland. And it's the first tour to start outside mainland Europe. And we can see Tommy Steele of Belgium won the race, including the Bray section. The town hall was presented to Bray by the Earl of Meath at a cost of just over £5,300 in 1884. And if you look at the downpipes, they will show the name Brabazon and 1881. And again, around the corner, we have the prestigious address of number 1 Killarney Road. And one of his conditions was that he would appoint his caretaker to look after his affairs in the town hall. It was the first building to become no smoking back in 1886. So we all think that 2014 was the first introduction of a no smoking ban. It was here in 1886. Ahead of its time. Basically because there was markets and fairs there, they didn't want to build them burnt down. At the back of the town hall there was a weighbridge, and there's also another sign in here saying that any person can pass freely through the building. The caretaker was Alfred Bailey, and he was the son-in-law of Lord Meath's coachman. And we have the Bailey family outside the town hall, taken around the 1920s in the town hall, because he retired in 1922, and we reckon this is the gathering of the family to say farewell, Mr. Bailey. Thank you for being there from 1883 to 1922 as the caretaker. Another person across the road, Mr. Dawson, then took over as caretaker of the town hall and also the weighmaster. He wasn't paid a salary, he got the money from the weighing, that's where he got his money. So you had to wait for people to come and get weighed for their oats and their potatoes and all the sheep's wool, etc. So we then start on the road itself, and along this road there are now 4 big houses: Ardara, Appingdon, Ratlin and Braemar. What I've done is put the names that they were called over the various ages, and these 4 houses replaced 12 cottages that were there before. They were deemed unfit for human habitation in 1887. Beyond Braemar, on this plot of ground, was another house called Bray Lodge, and it was demolished in 1909, and then we come into Roslin, which is the next house. Ardara was built for Mr. John Leslie O'Hanlon, who was an inspector and engineer with the Irish Lights. And he's a number of people of the Irish Lights that were involved. And he built the house on the design of his house, his previous house that he lived in Delbrook in Dundrum. Next house up was King's Court, and that was by the Lefanu family, William Lefanu, and then it passed to his brother Thomas Philip Lefanu, and he was involved in, first of all, as private secretary to the Lord Secretary of Ireland, and then he became a commissioner of the OPW, the Office of Public Works. And then when the family passed to a person called Brown, who was involved in cinemas and also electrical distribution, it then changed its name to Abingdon. Ratlin, again, was where Mr. O'Handel lived before, and then it became Canon Scott's house, and that's the main connection. And then Braemar it became very fashionable to call your house after a town near Balmoral in Scotland. So an awful lot of these summer houses adopted a name of the Scottish influence, and Braemar being one of these. But the only problem was the postman would have a great difficulty because there was 5 houses in Bray called Braemar. So when you look up the trade directories, etc., you'll see Braemar in Old Connaught Avenue, Braemar here on the Killarney Road, Braemar in the Rocky Valley, Braemar in Greystones, and 2 houses in Greystones called Braemar. And they were all within the Bray postal district. So this is the problem you have with houses of the same name, and again, trade directories. Opposite the house, we have the health centre. Well, that's, sorry, Mr. Philip Lefanu. And he was in Abingdon, and he was appointed in 1913 Commissioner of the Public Works, and he just refurbished the GPO and opened it in February 1916 for it to be destroyed in the Rising of 1916. And then once it was destroyed, he got the job of rebuilding it again. Across the road from Braemar and Ratlin and Abingdon and Adara is this building called Bray Cottage. And this was a family called Henry Flood. And Henry Flood, F-L-U-D-E, and he can trace his relations back to Sir William Crosby, who was the barrack master in Bray, but also the relation of, this is the houses that were built in 1972 called the Orchard behind the cottage, and they have since been demolished. The building that you just saw there a few moments ago will be demolished in the next couple of weeks because they're going to make way for one of these new health centres, and that's going to be demolished. And here we can see Bray Cottage with the L shape, and in 1963 it became under the control of the Health Board, and this was the grounds of the thing. Behind the cottage we can see Pound Lane, and again close to the area here we had the Pound, and again if we just go back to the Town Hall shot, and here we had the Pound inside the relics. And the other connection to Sir Paul Crosby was Richard Crosby, who did the hot air ballooning in 1785. Both took off from Menlo Gardens and also from the grounds of Dáil Éireann. He planned to get across the Irish Sea, but landed in Clontarf. His navigation was a bit off course. And the house next door is called Ard Cairn, and it looks better from the ground because this house was bought in 1977 for £77,000, and 4 sites around the house were also sold off for £1,500. It was a home built for a draper in the town called McRae, and he passed it on to his son, Charles McRae, and this was one of the agricultural holdings. The pigsty was just round the corner there, and one of the agricultural holdings in the town. Behind the the house was fields that went all the way back to King Edward Lawn, and the French school got to play in the grounds. It was then sold to an army officer called Godfrey Vere Hunt, and he had served at Ladysmith and a few other campaigns with the British Army. It then went to another army officer called Captain Nelson, and he first married Dorothy Boyers of North Owl Street in Dublin, and she died shortly after the marriage, and then he married again in 1932. And this is where the Nelson family lived, and McCrae's, who were the Drapers. Now, just coming up, this is where we have Roslyn House we're going to cover next, which is on the Killarney Road, and in here was the plot of ground that was called Bray Lodge. There was also a second Bray Lodge over on the Dublin Road as well. So again, two houses, the same name in the same town. I've shown here where the houses have changed names over the period, and again, we're going to just cover some of the people that lived in the houses, not them all. Roslyn House, again, was owned by the Brown family, and they were very much involved in the agricultural dairy equipment, and then into cinemas in various parts of Ireland, including Newbridge, Ennis, Waterford, Kilkenny, and that was the connection to the house. The balustrade is supposed to have come from the Latouche family home down at Bellevue in Dalgany, and this is where the balustrade came from. So you buy the house, and then, unlike a balustrade, another house goes up for sale, and you just buy the balustrade around the house. It's also the home of Sir Roland Fanning, and Sir Roland Fanning was first of all, a county police, a local district police officer, then a county police officer, then a district inspector, and then became what we would call today a Deputy Inspector General of the Royal Irish Constabulary. He retired in 1886. He became a Justice of the Peace, and in order to be a Justice of the Peace, you had to live in the area where you were a Justice. It was one of the conditions. He wrote to Bray Town Commissioners and said to them, you want to change the system from grand juries to using the electorate to cast a vote to elect a person. And he put his proposal for the new local government bill that came in 1899, but he says in 1896 you can see the House of Commons debating, and they make reference to Roland Fanning aptly making his submission to the Bray Town Commissioners, calling on the new introduction of the local government bill. So the birth of the current system of local government is down to Sir Roland Fanning. Up the road we had Beechhurst, and Beechhurst, I'm just going to concentrate on two people that lived there, and the first one being George Francis Savage Armstrong, who was born in 1845, died in 1906, was a lecturer in the university in Cork. He wrote poems, and he wrote long 75-verse poems. Not the easiest thing to read. And then his son, Francis Savage Armstrong, was killed in 1917 in the First World War. So what they did was they got his poems and they republished them in 1919 to fund the National War Memorial in Island Bridge. And this was one of the ways they proceeded to raise funds for the new National War Memorial in Island Bridge. So they just recreated the poems of George Francis Savage Armstrong. The Savage part comes from the connection to County Down and the Strangford House, and that's the Savage family, and they just adopted the name through marriage as Savage Armstrong. So you just see the name is George Francis Armstrong. He also wrote the stories of County Wicklow, and in that he gives us great views of his house and the views from his house. So to have these documents of 1917 vintage of to show how the area actually looked. This picture of the 1950s shows 11 greenhouses in the land of Beechhurst. You just see them at the top of the picture there. You just barely make them out. So this is where you can see it was very much market gardening and little small pocket farms, or they call them hobby farms, that these gentry had at the time. The next person who was in there was a person called Captain Dean. He was in charge of the Belle Isle in 1897 in Dunleary Harbour, and he invited the yachtsmen of Dunleary to come on board and have a few drinks on the Belle Isle. The yachtsmen refused his invitation because they said they already had a regatta organised from Dunleary round Dalkey Island and back to the thing. Mr. Dean took great displeasure of being turned down, so he wrote a letter to Queen Victoria telling them that the yachtsmen of Dunleary had refused his invitation. And basically the reply came back, "Time and tide waits for no man." So Captain Dean, when he retired, also went on to the Irish Lights, and here he is doing an inspection tour on the west coast of Ireland of all the lighthouses and lightships in 1903, and that's a picture of him there in that publication by the Commissioner of Irish Lights. This road now links the Herbert Road to the Killarney Road and is called King Edward Road. And again, the name suggests called after the King Edward, but as you go to the top of the road, it has an identity crisis. Because on one side of the road is Boher Re Eamon, and the other side is Boher Re Edward. Split personality. Just before the road joins, just above the house of Ard Cairn, there is 2 granite pillars, and that was the access route to a house called Kylemore that's on the east side of the King Edward Road. You can see the spire of Christ Church, built in 1862. Alma Villas, and we'll just go to one person here, Dr. Mix, and again the whole place was totally overgrown, and when Mrs. Mix, she had fruit and vegetables and she was winning prizes all around her at the Bray Horticultural Society show, and when the person went in after to clear the site, there was over 40 cats in the house. It's now a Montessori school. That's what it's used for today. Dr. William Mix. This is Killarney Hill House. It's now in Ardmore Crescent, so there's a little walkway from the Killarney Road that takes you into Ardmore Crescent, and it was done for Andrew Hamilton Reid, the founder of Switzer's. Then it was acquired by the Bailey family from near Rosscray, and we know on a wet Monday, August Monday in Bank Holiday Monday in 1927, the children of Mr. Bailey were playing in a loft out the back, and what happened is they discovered 1,500 percussion caps, 50 cartons of black powder, and attached to the ends of carrying bullets. They were wrapped in the General Advertiser of 1867, And interesting enough that that day in 1867, in the Advertiser, there was shown raids on houses in Enniskillen and Drogheda where they seized percussion caps. So here's the three children playing in the loft. And what was their father doing? He was in painting. And this is his painting that hangs in Bray Library. And we can see the girls from the Drummond School. And we know it's 1927 because there's a green postbox. This is the wyvern outside the town hall that was put up at the horse trough by Lord Mead. And then the thatched cottages at the top of the main street. Walking up the Killarney Road, if you notice this road, as you come down, comes down from the King Edward Road junction, which is just up here, goes, and the old road went there, and this road was put in 1950. But there was one house here called Rathclarren, and it was, for 1 or 2 years, it was a college run in 1867, and then because it was one of these summer houses that wasn't constantly lived in, it was always put up for sale, and we could see applied to Mr. Kennedy for further information about the house. But one of the people who lived in it was Hugh Kennedy, who was the first Attorney General and Chief Justice of Ireland. And that's Hugh Kennedy. That's the house as it is today. So, just after Bellevue, we have Rathclarren. It was a hotel and it was organised by Mrs. Keating. So you could phone Bray in the 1950s and Bray 172. Mrs. Keating would have the phone and you could book your stay. And we have the cost 12 shillings a week would have your full board in the Rathclarren Hotel. Table tennis, electric fires and sun lounges in all rooms, etc. So they were given the full works. So, Rathclarren Rovers and Mr. Macready's own family, who had a cycling club called the Owen Haas. In 1891, Richard Macready devised the rules for cycle polo. It was played in the Olympics in Crystal Palace in July 1908, where we beat Germany 3-1. The ones in the striped jackets is none other than the Rathclarren Rovers, and here we have Percy French doing his refereeing. Bray had the background, yeah. So now you know the only Irish sport ever played at the Olympics was cycle polo. Still played today in a few countries, and I've seen it played in France there 2 years ago. Oh, yeah. I still played up at the Phoenix Park. The people on the team were Ludlow Oswald Seeley, Henry Edward Oswald Seeley, Arthur or Alfred Oswald Seeley, and Richard Macready Jr. Richard Macready was on the Lusitania in the First World War and coming back to Ireland, where he was, the ship was hit. He was taken to Cove, and he looked off the shipping company for his railway ticket to Bray. Mm-hmm. They said they'd only pay it as far as Dublin, but he said you're entitled to it to your hometown, and he got it out to Bray. He then, he was coming back from the Battle Creek sanatorium run by Kellogg's in Michigan in USA. He then went on to New Zealand, where he became the chief medical officer and wrote the famous report that eating sweets, or children that lived near a candy store, had a greater chance of tooth decay. And that was his famous paper. He then, in 1968, came back to Chuckfield in England, where he died and is buried in Chuckfield in Ludlow on the far side, emigrated to Australia, and he died on the 8th fairway of his local golf club. He won over 1,000 prizes in relation to sport, 1,000 cups that he had in his when he died in relation to sport. This house was only built in 1973. It's called Patchwork, but against the wall was 3 cottages and another 2 sitting out in front here. And if you just look inside the gate, you can see a 15-mile signpost. So if you're ever looking for a milepost, there's where you'll see inside the gate here a 15-mile gate signpost, the stone post. This is an auctioneer's house, so he has all the bits and pieces gathered round. He also has, just in the trees down there, he has a lamp from the railways in the garden. So he has all these decorations. So, what was there was across the road, just beyond here, is too steep to go down to the river. So across the road, they have this wall, and there was a door here. If you look over the wall, you'll still see the tethering ring and a pathway leading down to the river, where the people would take their horses and bring them down to the river for watering. So you can actually see the physical door. If you look at the actual brick wall, this is the boundary wall of Rycroft Estate, where Charles Philip Cotton, the county surveyor or engineer, lived as well. So that was where he lived, and then it became the Ledbetter family, and the whole wall was blocked up in the 1950s, and the wall was raised. So here's the wall, just at the end of the wall, and we come down to, as you cross over, it just shows you how rivers' names change. In the 1700s, it was called the Scots Glen River. Then it became the Old Court River in the 1800 maps, and today most people refer to it as the Swan Brook River. So just these local items, and again, all the town council maps, etc., is Swan Brook River. So the old road and then the new road that was put in the 1950s, and this is Rathcarron Estate here. Sorry, we're going backwards and forward, sorry, my apologies. So the road that we saw going in here came out here at the top of the road, and then the new road in the 1950s. Why was the new road put in? Very simple. Oh, sorry, this is the, just at the, go back there a second. Just in here is Glenbrook, and this poses a nice little question. Here we see the, Thomas and Sarah Needham, and they had 2 children called Mary and Fanny Isabella. In the 1901 census, she's aged 53. When she died in 1907, she went to 80. Fanny, on the other side, she was aged 50 in 1901 census. In the 1911 census, she's gone to 80. And she dies in 1919, aged 89. Were they doing the thing for the Old Age Pension Act? More than likely. And holding the age. These are some of the quirks that you see in the census forms. And again, that's a nice little example of 2 of them up in their age. In 1943, the fire engine was coming back from an exercise in Wicklow Town. And here we can see the driver, which is William Doyle. When it came to the report into the accident, it was found that he was inexperienced and shouldn't have been driving the fire engine. On board the fire engine was Joseph Everard of Little Bray, Thomas Tobin of Killarney Villas, and 2 other of Commandant Park of his relations, the Doyle brothers, and also a person called Eddie Murray. The fire engine came down the old road at speed. Because the tank behind the fire engine, the whole thing became top heavy, overturned, and Mrs. Mary Farrell was standing on the pavement. The fire engine hit her, and she was taken to Dundleary Hospital, where she died 3 days later. Her brother made a claim against the council, and he was awarded £150. It then came to the people who were injured in the accident, and in the Dáil report of the 4th of December 1943, it says that the 4 injured men were still waiting money. The Minister in charge of local government reported that the claims had only been put in on the 11th of November, but they had a query about Mr. Eddie Murray because there's no record of him being in the fire service, and they were awaiting a report from the town council. Things don't change. So here we can see Glencourt for the... Now, coming up the Glencourt, we just covered in here. We had a couple of pieces of property here. We had Glencourt House, we had Glencourt Cottage, and then in the middle we had a place called the Nurseries, and that was run by Vincent Byrne, and he was one of the big nursery men in the area. Glencourt Cottage, in 1971, Mary and Josephine Cox were found dead in the house. The state pathologist stated that they had been at least in the house for 6 weeks before they were found. But they were so frugal, but cash rich, they didn't want to spend any money. Nobody looked into them. Anybody called at the house, they were given short change and told, go away. And basically, the people were, as I say, the 2 ladies, Mary and Josephine, cash rich, and they were even directors of the Westminster Bank. Across the road, we have Killarney House, and I'm just going to cover a few. Again, we get an awful lot of retired Indian Army people coming to live. So, first of all, was Colonel Bigger. Then after that came the Urch family, and they were involved in colour slides. Then we had a Joseph Hagan, who was involved in writing fiction. Then we had Phil Coulter, who was the musician. So we got it very much in his latter life. It's still a private house, and it's, you can be seeing. Down again. And that is Killarney House. So Phil has just sold it a couple of months back and has moved out to another house in the town. Another house which was accessed from the Killarney Lane beside Killarney House, and this went down to Killarney Wood House, and it was owned by the Country House Association, and it was an English group that set up, and in 1964 then it became Brookhouse School, and part of the grounds recently has been sold off to the Cairnhill Nursing Home. Beside it we have Ardmore Studios, and that was the home of Justice Langlois de Foy, and that was the Ardmore House. You don't usually get up past the studio itself. That's what the house looks like. It's now the offices for Ardmore Studio, and Ardmore Studio set up in 1958. We have the dining hall and the suites of the house just beside it, and then these are the studios, and the first director of Ardmore Studios was Emmett Dawson. And that's the editing suites and dining hall up in Ardmore Studios. Across the road you had another studios, which is now a Coptic church, and it was run by Silver Pines and Mr. Bill Stapleton, and that was what the studios looked like. The house is still there, the building is still there, but converted to a Coptic church. These made small television and also recorded artists of the music industry in the laboratory. And just beyond that then we have Ferry Hill, and we have the Cross, and the whole area of what they call the Bishop of Saron or Kilsaran, and this is supposed to be a gravesite of the area of Saron, the Church of Saron. And just that cross stands in the middle of Ferry Hill. Most of us know Ferry Hill for one reason, and one reason only. It was the home of Gareth Fitzgerald. And he spent his childhood days in Bray, and that's what he looked like when he was going to Miss Braden's school in Bray. and he's Desmond Fitzgerald.
He didn't have out socks.
The shoes are the same as well.
Like smart match, no?
Across the road from Ferry Hill, we have the bog called Brick, and we have many reports, including the Electronic Parliamentary Papers of Ireland, where the town clerk in Dunleary was being questioned as to why he was buying dearer bricks from Bray at just an extra 2 shillings per dozen over the price, and he said they were the best bricks for manhole covers or manholes in Dunleary. So if you go around the borough of Dunleary, if you open them up, you might find a bog called Brick. The best example of the bog called Brick is Festina Lente in Old Connaught, and you can see the red brick walls in Festina Lente, and they're all done in the bog called Brick. The bog called Brick was run by Mr. J.E. McCormick, who had offices in 12 Quinsborough Road, but he also ran the brickworks in Dean's Grange, on Pottery Road there in Dean's Grange. Rahan is where we had Edward Doyle, Henry Edward Doyle, Arthur Conan's uncle lived. And just beside it here, you had another house called Ripley and Rockcrohan, and that was built in 1911 and destroyed in 1980, where 2 young lads tragically lost their lives when they were playing in the ruins of the house. And there we have the Bogcall Brickworks. The brickworks doesn't exist anymore. The pond has been filled in and all, so there's very little actual physical to be seen in relation to the house. Beside it also you have St. Helens, and again we'll cover that in a few moments. So there is Mr. McCormick, and you can go and buy your roof sheeting and everything else, your sewer pipes and all the rest, and this is his docket of 1899. So £2, 4 shillings, and you're done of bricks, and away you went. And here we can see also he died at Monkstown in 1894, and he had the Dean's Grange. He also had extensive interest in Kingstown and Dorky as well. And he was also on the Poor Guardians, he was also on the Bray Town Commissioners. He was a man for all seasons. And the Cabinteely sessions. This name remains Brickfield Lane, so if you look down the lane you can see Brickfield Lane itself leading down to where the brickworks was, and then the Bogcall Brick is there on the table. And Arthur Conan Doyle. Edward Doyle, again, he succeeded Mulvaney as the director of the National Gallery, and again he died in 1892, I think it is when he died. And we can see here he acquired a number of copies of his own work and also of his father for the National Gallery. So here's the image of his father in the National Gallery, and also one of his own pieces of handiwork, Henry Edward Doyle's. And this is it, a desert drama. I should have remembered it. And that's the only reference it is to Bray, and it says, "Don't cry, little women, we have a good time together. Give all my love to my friends at Bray." So we don't know whether he stayed in Bray or whatever, but this is the only reference. And then again to this Amy McCarthy and the Blessingtons, whether this for Blessington, Blessington family or a Blessington location, we don't know, but that's the only reference. And that is in his book, and we can see the actual words in the book. The work of Arthur Conan Doyle. And here we can see Henry, who married Jane Ball, down to Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle. So St. Helens beside it, the man we're going to look here is John Chandler Smith. He's buried in St. Paul's graveyard in Bray, and there's a nice little cherry coloured headstone, because the person who came after him to live in the house was called Mrs. Cherry, and she was buried in the same grave with him, and they put this cherry headstone on the grave. And They also had that he was responsible for the Loop Line Bridge between Tower Street and Connolly Station. That's his piece of work.
Very good.
It's also in relation to Adrian Hopkins of Bray Travel, and he acquired the premises in 1969, just after 1969, when they established Bray Travel, and then Bray Travel ceased in 1980, but in 1987 he got arrested off France trying to import arms into Ireland on the Escont ship. And here we can see the Bray Travel, and 43 guineas would take you to Malaga, and again he was looking for staff, and then here you have 39 guineas a week for your holidays, for 1 week's holiday, etc. Just to have a look at the various places they went to: Greece, Malta, the Canaries, USA, Canada, Mallorca, and the Costa del Sol, and Kenya. The price of your holiday, just looking at it, your trip to Kenya would have cost you the price of a 22-inch colour television. Your trip to the Grand Canaries would have cost you a fridge freezer. Your Ibiza trip would have cost you just an Electrolux cleaner. Your Costa del Sol would have again come in as an Electrolux cleaner. So when you look at the prices, what they were charging, £299 got you to Seychelles with Bray Travel. Back all this happening in 1977. They were sort of called a semi-bonded, because they only bonded you for your airline piece of your travel, not the full works. So your hotel and everything else, if you were left on the shore, that was it. The reason why 139, this is Freddie Laker and SkyTrain coming into play, and they used the Freddie Lakers, etc. And then they were unable to pay their fees, and the judge, Justice Costello, said that they should be put into liquidation in 1980. And people were stranded, 100 people stranded on the Canary Islands over Christmas 1980. Their staff was owed 43,000. Again, it's great to follow the money trail. And one of the final houses we're going to look at is this house called Cherry Lawn, but it was originally known as Schomburg. Schomburg was built for a person called William Chamney. His aunt, Elizabeth Chamney, married a George Frederick Hodson from Newcastle, or in County Durham in Northern England, who was a chemist. And they had a son called John Crawford Hodson. And he came over on the 10th of June 1907 to see his cousin, the William Chamney of Schomburg. The house wasn't built until 1910, but we'll just cover that off in a moment. But they met in the Shelbourne Hotel with none other than Arthur Vickers, who was the person in charge of the crown jewels. So this is where the story gets interesting. The following day, on the 11th of June, John Crawford Hodson was invited to Dublin Castle by Arthur Vickers and was shown the state papers and the crown jewels. That is the last time they were ever seen. The chief suspect of the time was a person called Frank Shackleton, the younger brother of Ernest Shackleton, who had run up debts and had pieces in the safe worth 60,000. He then fled to Portuguese West Africa. He was arrested and brought back to London and spent 15 months in prison. He came out and changed his name to Frank Mellor, and he lived with his sister Amy Shackleton in Chichester in England, where he ran an antiquarian shop. His debts were, at the time of his death, was £85,000. So, as you step in to the front door of the house originally called Schomburg, now called Cherry Lawn, you step over this coat of arms of the Chamney family that can trace their relations all the way back to John Chamney of Shillelagh of the forge in Shillelagh in Wicklow. Interesting enough, on the day that they were meeting in the Shelbourne Hotel, William Chamney, who worked for the Bank of Ireland, had just been made a JP for the county, and the new coat of arms for William Chamney himself, with a fellow going up a ladder, with a tankard, another paraphernalia at the top, with a goat sitting at the bottom of it. You couldn't write the script in relation to Schomburg, William Chamney and the Irish crown jewels. This is the crown jewels that went missing, or a copy of what they look like, and the two sets, and they reckon today worth in the region of about £5 million. Here we can see the police report, and it shows £1,000 rewarded because the king was most annoyed because he had come over on the 10th of June 1907, or 10th of July 1907, to open the exhibition in Herbert Park. And here we can see Mr. Shackleton's £40,000 overdraft, etc., and documents relating to it were in the safe and also stolen. There was a story going around that Frank Shackleton was having a relationship with the cousin of the king, the Duke of Argyll. That's another day's work. And it's in many publications in relation to the crown jewels, the disappearing. There's so many theories and counter-theories in relation to the crown jewels. Also in the safe was none other than William Chamney's wife's jewellery as well. The last house we're going to cover is Ballymorris. It's where St Fergus Church is now, and Victor Charles Lefanu, who was a school teacher, also played 11 times for Ireland, captain 11 times for Ireland. He also was the land agent for the Earl of Meath, and again his father wrote the document 70 years of Irish life, and he lived up in Summerhill and Enniskerry. We've already covered his other brother, Thomas Philip Lefanu, down in Abington, further down the road. And he died in 1939. Interesting enough that his other nephew, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, won the Round the Houses race in Bray in 1934, and the first prize of £50 plus a trophy, plus a replica trophy, was put up by the Earl of Meath. And that's what Ballymorris looked like, and that's what it looks like today, St Fergus Church. Thank you very much.